Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Garden of Grace Devotion. My name is Pastor Katie, and I'm one of the pastors at Trinity Lutheran Church in Lilburn, Georgia. Today, the question that I greet you with is, what motivates you to action? What motivates you to action? In our readings for this coming Sunday, we have a reading from the Gospel of Luke where people appear to be motivated by fear and rage. And that reading is set up alongside a reading from 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul is trying to encourage the people of Corinth in the early church to allow love to be their motivation and their currency. I've been taken with these two readings this week and setting them alongside each other. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, Jesus is in the synagogue. Last week we had the first half of this. He's read from a scroll of Isaiah to the people. How he came to bring good news to the poor, to set the captives free. He read these words to the people in the synagogue that day. And as of last week's passage, they were happy with him. They were happy with Jesus. And at the beginning of this week's passage, they seemed to be happy with him as well. They were amazed at the gracious words that came out of his mouth, the passage reads. But then Jesus went on to say words and recount stories that pointed out that the good news of the gospel that he brought was not only for them, it was also for people that they would have considered outsiders, people they would have considered as not belonging. These words were hard for the people in the synagogue to hear that day. There was also some perhaps inclination that it was important for them to get with the words and the themes that Jesus was preaching. Their response was one of big feelings. They went from being amazed at the gracious words that Jesus had said to being filled with rage. They got up and they drove him out of the town and led him to the brow of a cliff on which their town was built, that they might throw him off a cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way. The people were so filled with rage, and rage is often fed by fear. And that's typically the kindling. That's typically the root of rage, is fear. They were so filled with rage that they were ready to throw Jesus off of a cliff. And they were pretty sure that they were right. I mean, after all, what he was preaching was totally different than the way they understood things. They understood that they were the chosen line. They were the people who were important to God, and anybody else, these other groups that were represented by the stories Jesus told, It was very hard for them to fathom that those folks might also be recipients of God's love and mercy. So they responded. They responded in rage. And even though they were there with Jesus himself, the Son of God, they were so sure that they were right and he was wrong that they were ready to throw him off of a cliff. This story, it gives me pause. It helps me remember to take time, especially when I'm having big feelings about something. It reminds me of the importance of taking time to pause and to reflect instead of reacting with rage. Because in those moments, I'm not thinking clearly. It doesn't mean that we can't use anger to motivate us, but acting out of a rage, it wasn't going to help anybody. And so we have that story, the story from the Gospel of Luke about Jesus getting kicked out of the temple and nearly thrown off a cliff. And that story is coupled this week with the passage from 1 Corinthians 13. It's a passage that we often associate with weddings, right? It's read at weddings a lot of times. But it's actually, this passage is not about a lovey-dovey kind of love. This passage is from a man who was writing to the early church around 55 AD. A church who was struggling, trying to figure out what it meant to be the church. And they were arguing with each other. They were having a very difficult time. And this part of this letter was written to remind them about the core motivation for all that they do is to be grounded in love. It reads, "If I speak in the tongues of humans and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no record of wrongs. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love, these three remain. And the greatest of these is love." This is the passage that is put up alongside the passage from the Gospel of John for this weekend. These two are tied together in the lectionary. And it seems to me that they comment on the root of action. Fear and rage can propel us to do things without thinking. Love speaks to truth Love can advocate. Love can listen. Love can seek first to understand, then be understood. Love can stand up for their neighbor. Love can support the things that are important. Love can propel us forward as well, but in a different way, from a different seed. In the Gospels, we hear from Jesus, the two greatest commandments are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. I appreciate these two readings. I appreciate the importance of remembering to pause when I want to leap without thinking. I appreciate the reminder from 1 Corinthians that now we only know in part. That reminder can help me to think before I speak. These are not easy times. There are no shortage of things to wrestle with, people to support, people to pray for. May our God help us to do all that we do, grounded in love. And may God's peace be with you today and always. Amen.